So, you said before you're very anti-victimhood. What do you mean there?
Well, I think victimhood has a certain degree of place. I think if you are someone who's gone a long life sort of repressing trauma, things that have happened to you as a child, I think the first step in coming to terms with that is obviously realizing what happened to you. And then you might start to see yourself as a victim. But I think that's an important step because you're realizing maybe some things you've blamed yourself for aren't your fault. And you have to kind of grieve the fact that you were victimized. But the issue is that now we're teaching people to stay in that space and they get stuck there, because the next step after that is to possibly forgive if that's part of it. But then, to realize that even though someone might have taken something from you, if you were abused or something like that happened, and now you've had to suffer because of that person's actions, wallowing in a sense of blame and resentment, you're the only person then losing out because you're just making your life worse. And I can't tell you just how rewarding it is to learn that despite your struggles and despite what you've been through, you can actually take accountability for that and make your life something great. And that was something I realized a lot going through the chronic pain thing. But in terms of how the culture teaches it, once I moved to the UK, I didn't think about homophobia much at all. I was very much of the mindset that I live in a liberal society. I'm very grateful to live in the time I do. And I largely don't have any issues with homophobia. An odd experience here or there. The most really over here is like going home from a nightclub at night. There's some random person on the street who is drunk and says something. But I've never really considered those to be soul destroying unless, I've never been physically attacked. I've never lost a job, anything like that. In actual fact, I noticed that when I graduated and moved to London, I feel like it was more of a commodity in terms of people, because of the DEI stuff, people love to have a minority group. But within the queer circles, they're very anti-establishment. They're very obsessed with the concept of heteronormative society. So they see the fact that the world, they think the world is set up for straight people, and that to be straight, you have an inherent privilege. And this is where it ties into queer theory.
Wait, hang on. That is kind of true though, right? Like, I mean, I get what you mean, but yeah, the world is set up for straight people. What is the problem with heteronormativity? Like looking at the world in this way. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the issue there?
Yeah. So I think what's important with all of these ideas is that there's always grains of truth within them, right? So when you think of, for example, the fat positivity movement, there's a grain of truth in that in terms of don't hate yourself. It's never, you need to love yourself and accept where you're at, But if you then say, oh, well, the reason I struggle is because of society's attitude towards me. And you can argue that sometimes people are discriminated against because of the way they look or their size. So there are grains of truth in that. But then they take it to the nth degree and they say, actually, I have no responsibility over my situation. It's society that needs to change. So in terms of heteronormativity, the fact that the world is built for straight people, you can argue that that's a fact. But what we've steered away from now, and DEI focuses on this because DEI makes historically marginalized groups sacred and it alienates the majority group. So the fact that the world is built for straight people makes sense because the majority of people are straight. Men and women need to have babies in order for us to procreate and continue. So perhaps you might be in situations where all of your colleagues are straight and maybe you don't relate to them as well. But there's nothing wrong with that. It just kind of is what it is. And they, I think, took the concepts of heteronormativity and they amplified it. So I started looking for homophobia in places where it wasn't. So if I met a straight guy, my initial assumption would be, oh, he probably has an issue with me being gay. Or if I didn't relate to him as well, or if he didn't show as much interest in getting to know me and he gave girls more attention or he gave guys more attention, I would sort of see that as he's not overcome his prejudice and therefore he thinks it's not worth getting to know me. But in reality, we all vibe with different people. All of us connect differently with people. And that's just what it is. But then I've met many straight guys who have been very interested in me and me into them. But it starts to demonize certain groups. So you start seeing straight white men as a homogenous group to be judged, which is really unhelpful. And it teaches people that if you go up for a job and you don't get it, even if there's zero evidence of homophobia as to the reason why, then a lot of people are taught to assume that that's the case. And it's really, really damaging. It's disempowering. And then meanwhile, a lot of these people are living quite unconventional lifestyles, which again, there's nothing wrong with. But a lot of them, you know, are in and out of jobs, taking drugs, partying too much. And one thing that's really interesting is that they teach people that, you know, heteronormativity oppresses people because of they're not sexually liberated. So a lot of them see the monogamous family and the conventional 9-to-5 lifestyle as something to look down upon. But in reality, what it ends up doing is a lot of gay people think that they need to be non-committal, have loads of sex and be in open relationships. And perhaps that works for some people. But the reality that I see is that lots of them are very unhappy. So I'll just wrap up that point. In terms of the victimhood stuff, I think the only people losing out on it are the gay community. But I don't want to dilute the fact that it actually is really hard growing up in a heteronormative society, even if you are accepted for being gay. If you grow up in a classroom with only straight boys and girls, the feeling of isolation and not being able to relate to people is really difficult. And this is something I think we're missing, because when people think about gay kids being trans, they only think about overt homophobia. But in reality, kids really just want to be accepted. And even if everyone's kind to you and accepting, if you feel lonely and like you can't relate to people, then it can still be a real struggle. And I think that's quite an important thing. So like I said, it's not that it's not an issue and it's not difficult, but there's not much we can do about the majority of society being straight. So we have to take responsibility for our own sexuality and find a way to make it work.